She didn't knock. The lecture hall door swung open, and Imani Cole walked in like the room owed her a seat, because it did. Folder pressed to her chest, short natural coils sitting neat against her face, eyes moving once across the room with the calm of someone who had already decided she belonged here before anyone else got the chance to weigh in. Every head turned. She felt it. She always felt it, that particular weight of a room making a decision about you before you've opened your mouth. She had felt it at Incheon Airport, at the dormitory check-in desk, at the international student orientation where she stood in a room of 40 and counted herself once and stopped counting. She was used to the wait. She found an empty seat in the middle row, set her folder down, opened her notebook. That was when the voice came. Left side of the room, lazy, unbothered, the particular drawl of a man who has never once been interrupted and has built a personality around the fact. They really will give scholarships to anyone these days. The room didn't gasp. It went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when someone says the thing everyone was already thinking and nobody was supposed to say out loud. Imani's pen stopped moving. She didn't look up immediately. She took one breath, let it settle, let it become something she could use. Then she turned. He was sitting with one arm slung over the back of his chair like the seat belonged to him by inheritance. Long dark hair tied loosely at the base of his neck, a few strands falling forward across his face. The kind of face that understood its own symmetry and had stopped being grateful for it a long time ago. And resting on the desk in front of him, his right hand. A tattoo, clean dark lines, a single Hanya character pressed into the skin. She looked at him for exactly the right amount of time. "Interesting," she said. "I submitted 3 years of academic records, 2 personal essays, and a letter of recommendation from a university dean to earn my place here." A pause, clean, deliberate, held just long enough. "What exactly did you submit to earn yours?" Nobody laughed, but 3 people looked immediately at their desks to hide the fact that they wanted to. The boy's expression didn't break. It moved, just at the corners, just behind the eyes. The faintest shift of something waking up that had been asleep. Imani turned back to her notebook, uncapped her pen, continued writing. "Done. Queens, if this is your very first time here, welcome. You just walked into exactly the kind of story this channel was built for. Before we go any further, I need to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city, your country, your continent in the comments because I genuinely want to know who is in this room with me tonight. And if nobody has told you yet, this channel was made for women who refuse to be reduced. Women who feel everything and keep going anyway. Subscribe right now because what happens next to this woman is not something you want to find out secondhand. Like this video, if you already know, that boy just made a very serious mistake. Stay with me." His name was Kim Yi-won. She learned this from Soo-yeon, who caught up with her 2 corridors after class with the energy of someone who had been building courage the entire walk. "You talked back to him." "I answered him," Imani said, still moving. "There's a difference." "No," Soo-yeon lowered her voice even in a loud hallway. "You don't understand what you did. Nobody answers him. There was a student last semester. He corrected Yi-won once in front of the class. One time. By the following week, he had dropped the course entirely." Imani considered this without breaking stride. He withdrew because of embarrassment. Soo-yeon's expression moved in a way that said embarrassment was the generous version. Why hasn't a professor addressed it? Soo-yeon opened her mouth, then closed it. Something moved behind her eyes, the expression of a person standing at the edge of information they don't know how to hand over. "Just be careful," she said finally. "You said that without answering my question." Soo-yeon was already walking away. Imani watched her go and filed the non-answer beside the tattoo and the draped arm and the look in Yi-won's eyes when she spoke back, the look that was not anger, which was the part that bothered her more than anger would have. She called her mother from the dormitory stairwell that evening. Her mother's voice came through warm and slightly breathless. End of a long shift, still in her work shoes, the background sounds of a home that had been held together on discipline and love and very little margin for error for 22 years. How was the first real day? Fine. Imani. A beat. The coursework is what I expected. The professor seems serious. Are people treating you right? I'm handling it. Baby, that is not what I asked. Imani pressed her back against the stairwell wall. Through the small window above her, Soul moved, lit and massive, and completely indifferent to the fact that she was the first person in her family to study abroad, on a scholarship that had taken 3 years to pursue, in a city where she did not yet know how to ask for directions. I'm handling it, she said again, quieter, I promise. She didn't tell her mother about Yiwon. There was nothing to tell yet. A boy with a tattoo and a loose mouth had tried to make her feel small in front of 30 people, and she had not felt small. That wasn't news. That was just a Tuesday. What happened 3 days later, that was news. She was in the campus courtyard when she saw it. A first-year student. She didn't know his name yet, just his face, just the way he carried himself with the careful smallness of someone still figuring out how to exist in a new environment. Dropped an entire stack of printed reports outside the administrative building. Papers scattered across the wet courtyard tiles in every direction. People walked around him. One person laughed. Yiwon was leaning against the wall nearby with 2 of his associates, the kind of young men who position themselves near power and call it friendship. He watched the first-year scramble, said something to the 2 beside him. They laughed louder. Then Yiwon walked over. For 1/2 second, watching from across the courtyard, Imani thought, he's going to help. He crouched down, picked up one paper, looked at it with theatrical interest. International Relations. He read the title aloud, slowly, like he was reading a joke. Did they lower the entry requirements again, or did you just get lost? The first year stopped moving. His hands went still on the scattered papers. His face did the thing faces do when a person is deciding between fighting back and surviving. He chose surviving. He gathered his papers in silence while Yiwon stood over him, while the 2 associates laughed, while everyone else in the courtyard found something else to look at. Imani's jaw was tight by the time the first year finally stood and walked away. She looked at Yiwon across the courtyard. He looked back, direct, no apology in it, no awareness that he had done anything requiring one. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds and walked away without a word. But her hands were not steady. The group project assignment came 5 days later. Professor Wu read the pairings from a printed list with the energy of a man who had made these decisions at random and felt no obligation to defend them. Kim Yiwon, Cole Imani. Yiwon was looking at his phone. He didn't react visibly. Imani wrote down the parameters in precise handwriting and did not look in his direction. After class, he appeared beside her desk without announcement. Library, Wednesday, 7. 8, she said without looking up. I have a call with my academic advisor at 7. He looked at her. She capped her pen and looked back. A beat. Something moved in his expression and was gone. 8, he said. He left. She looked at the empty doorway and thought, there it is again. Not anger, not dismissal. Something that didn't have a name yet and that she wasn't sure she wanted to give one. Wednesday. He was already there when she arrived at 8:02. That was the first surprise. Long hair loose tonight, dark jacket, materials open in front of him, organized, she noticed, in a way that contradicted every performance he ran in lecture halls and courtyards. Annotated, prepared. The work of someone who had actually engaged with the material before showing up. She sat across from him. They worked. 40 minutes, functional silence. She built the research framework. When she slid the market analysis across the table, he reviewed it without being asked and returned it with 3 corrections in the margins. All 3 were accurate. All 3 improved the work. She noticed. She said nothing. Then, without looking up, you took the international business track. Yes. Why? She glanced at him, not a threat in the question. Something closer to genuine curiosity, which was the last thing she expected from his mouth. Because I want to build something that crosses borders, she said. And I want to understand the infrastructure of how things actually move before I build anything that has to survive crossing them. He looked at the page. That's a real answer. I give real answers. Most people say they want a position at a multinational, something safe. I'm not most people. He looked up then, fully, directly, without the performance of disdain she had catalogued across every classroom and corridor encounter. Like he had decided, quietly and without announcement, to actually look. She held it and went back to her work. He didn't speak for another 20 minutes. But when she passed him the second section, he took it without hesitation, read it with attention, and left a single comment in the margin that was the most genuinely useful feedback she had received from anyone at this university. She read it twice. She didn't tell him that. She watched what he did to Lee Junho on a Thursday afternoon, and something cold settled in her chest and stayed there. Junho sat in the third row, answered questions only when directly called upon, kept himself careful and contained, not because he lacked intelligence, she had seen his written work, it was precise and considered, but because he had understood early that smallness was survival in a room that also contained Kim Yi-won. It didn't protect him. Junho was at the front presenting early draft work when Yi-won arrived late, glanced at the screen for 3 seconds, and said to the room, not to Junho, which was somehow worse. If that passes for analysis, I understand why the grading curve still exists. Junho's hand dropped from the clicker. His shoulders came up toward his ears in the specific way shoulders move when a person is deciding between defending themselves and getting out of the room intact. He chose getting out intact. The professor made a vague sound of disapproval and moved the session forward. The class moved with it. Junho stood at the front of the room and collected his materials with the careful, deliberate movements of someone managing the distance between themselves and falling apart in public. Imani found Yi-won in the corridor after. What you said to him. He kept walking. She matched pace. I've seen his draft. It was competent work. You said what you said to break him down in front of people, not because it was true. You're very invested in situations that don't involve you. Basic decency involves me. It involves everyone in that room. He stopped, turned. The carelessness was gone from his posture. Not threatening, something flatter, more direct. A different register than anything she had seen from him yet. You want to know why nobody stops me? Quiet, almost conversational. I want you to stop yourself. He looked at her, long and even. You said you were keeping count, he said, returning her own words with a flatness that might have been mockery, or might have been something sitting just beside it. I meant it. She walked past him. He didn't follow. He stood in the corridor, and 2 students who came around the corner in the following seconds noted afterward that the expression on Kim Yi-won's face was one they had not seen before and could not describe accurately when asked. She was not supposed to be on that road. Past 10. The main route was closed for construction, and the app had redirected her through side streets she didn't fully know toward a bus stop 6 minutes ahead. She heard the voices before she saw anything. Low, multiple, coming from a loading area set back from the street, a wide doorway behind a building with no visible signage. She would have kept walking. She had already begun to. Then one voice separated from the group, and she knew it before her mind caught up with how. She stepped back, into the shadow of the wall, looked through the gap between 2 parked vans. Yi-won stood in the center of the space. Hair loose, jacket different from anything she had seen on campus, dark, structured, deliberate in a way that his university clothes never were. The men arranged around him were older, some significantly. They stood in the particular configuration of people waiting for direction. He gave it. She couldn't hear every word. She didn't need to. The way the men moved when he spoke told her what the words would have added. Quick, without question, with the economy of movement that comes from knowing hesitation has costs. Then a disagreement at the edge of the group. Brief, volatile, a larger man's voice rising. Yiwon didn't raise his voice back. He said 2 words and made one small gesture, and the larger man stepped back immediately. Stepped back and looked at the floor and did not speak again. His right hand was visible as he gestured. The tattoo, Chinese letter, the same clean dark lines she had seen across a library table. Imani's hand came up over her own mouth. He turned, not toward her, just turning, and scanned the dark beyond the loading area with the slow attention of someone whose instincts had been trained by a life she couldn't see the shape of from here. She pressed flat against the wall. She did not breathe. 4 seconds, 5, 6. He looked away, spoke quietly to the man beside him. The group began to disperse. Imani walked, even pace, face forward. She did not let herself run until she turned the corner and confirmed the dark behind her was empty. Then she ran. Queens, she just saw something she was never meant to see. The man who has been trying to break people down in that classroom is not who she thought he was. He is something else entirely. Something with reach and weight and consequences that don't stay inside university walls. And she is now somewhere inside that, whether she chose it or not. Like this video right now if your heart is in your throat, because mine is. And tell me in the comments, should Imani run? Does she report what she saw and risk everything? Or is she already too deep in for any of those options to actually save her? I need your answer before this story continues. She came to class the next morning. She almost didn't. She sat in her dormitory room at 6 a.m. with her bag packed and her shoes in her hand, and she thought clearly, without drama, the way she thought through real problems about every rational exit. Transfer request, academic advisor, a phone call home that started with words she had promised herself she would never say. Then she thought about the scholarship, the 3 years it had taken to build toward it, her mother's work shoes at the end of a double shift, the dean's letter, the 2 essays she had rewritten 4 times until they said exactly what she meant and not one word more. She put her shoes on. She arrived before him, sat down, opened her notebook, held her pen so her hand had something to do with itself. He came in at 9:07, sat 2 rows ahead and to the left. She watched the back of his head for 20 minutes and learned nothing from it. He was as still in this room as he had been commanding in that loading area, and the gap between those 2 versions of the same person was wide enough to make her head hurt. At one point he turned slightly left. She looked immediately at her notebook. She didn't know if he had seen her looking. She didn't know what he would do with it if he had. She did not let herself think about the larger man stepping back, about the 2 words, about the way 20 people had rearranged themselves around one gesture from his right hand. She looked at her notebook, and she did not think about any of it. He found her 2 days later. Not inside the building. Outside. He was waiting when she came through the door, falling into step beside her with the patience of someone who had chosen the moment carefully. Walk with me. Not a request, but not the lecture hall voice either. This was the flat, stripped register she had half heard through the gap between vans. She walked. They went to the campus garden. Empty, the light going gray. He stopped at the far end, turned, hands in his jacket pockets, his face carrying nothing readable. What did you see? Also not a question. I don't know what you're referring to. Imani. Her name, first time, no performance in it, no distance. Just her name stated like a fact. She met his eyes directly. I saw enough. Do you understand what enough means here? Yes. Then you understand why this conversation matters. I understand why you think it matters. She kept her voice level. I also know I wasn't looking for any of it. I was rerouted by a construction closure. I wasn't following you. I wasn't looking for anything to use. She held his gaze. And I haven't told anyone, which you already know. Because if I had, this conversation would be happening somewhere very different. Something moved in his expression. Fast, gone. So, she lifted her chin. Tell me what you're actually asking. He was quiet. The garden was quiet around them. I'm asking if I have a problem. And I'm telling you I didn't come 6,000 miles to disappear. clean, flat, no performance. I don't want your world, I want my degree. Those two things don't have to touch each other. He held her gaze for a long time, long enough that staying still under it cost her something she didn't show. Then he stepped back. Stop taking the side streets after dark, he said. He walked away before she could answer. She stood in the garden alone and released a breath that had been living in her chest for 2 full days. Suyeon took her for ramen that weekend without asking if she wanted to go, which was the right call because Imani would have said no, and she needed to go. Last year, Suyeon said, rotating her chopsticks, there was a girl in the department. She was being harassed not by Yiwon, by someone external to the university. It had been going on for months. Everyone could feel it. Nobody knew how to stop it. Imani waited. It stopped, Suyeon said. Completely. The person disappeared from her life. She never filed a report. She never explained anything. She transferred the following semester. And you think Yiwon? I don't think anything specific. Suyeon met her eyes. I just know that in the week after it stopped, he was the worst he had ever been in that classroom. Louder, more cutting, like he was deliberately putting something heavy back on. A pause. And then it settled. Imani sat with this. The courtyard, the first year's scattered papers, the theatrical cruelty of it, the performance. What if the performance was the point? What if he was making sure no one would want to be near him? Why are you telling me this? She asked. Suyeon looked at her carefully. Because I can see that you're trying to figure out who he is. A pause. And I think the answer is going to cost you something when you find it. Next project session. He arrived on time, prepared, more material than she had assigned. She stared for one unguarded second before she controlled her face. He sat down, pushed a section across the table, annotated, thorough, the work of someone who had actually engaged, and looked at her. You look surprised. I am. Don't be. They worked for almost 2 hours. The friction between them had changed, less performance on both sides, more pressure. The particular tension of two people trying not to look at each other too directly for reasons neither has named out loud. Toward the end, she was gathering her notes when she said, not planned, the tattoo on your hand. He looked up. Chinese letter, endure. She kept her voice even. You had it before university. Before. She didn't push, zipped her bag. My grandmother had something like that, she said. Not a single word, a whole phrase. She said, keep going until the ground becomes familiar. She gave it to my mother. My mother gave it to me. She looked up. The expression on his face was something she had not seen before. Not the lecture hall, not the loading area, not the garden. Something prior to all of it. Something that looked like it had been in a closed room for a long time and had stepped into the light by accident and didn't yet know whether to stay or go back. He looked away first. She left. Walking back across campus, she noticed her chest felt strange. Not frightened. Something adjacent to frightened, but on the other side of it. Something warm and unsteady that had no clean name. She didn't examine it too closely. She didn't see the man following her on the first day. Third day, same jacket, same deliberate distance, 2 different routes. Fourth day, she knew it wasn't coincidence. She told no one, changed her patterns, stayed in lit spaces, moved within groups of other students when she could. 6th evening, library closing, bus in 12 minutes, main path well-lit direct, she took it. They were waiting at the turn, before the main gate. 2 men, not students. The quality of the air shifted before she fully processed their faces, and her body understood, complete, immediate, that this had been arranged. She calculated, distance back to the library, distance to the gate, whether her voice would carry far enough to matter. Then movement from the direction of the gate. Fast, no sound she registered until he was already between her and them. Yiwon. What happened in the next 90 seconds she would process later, in fragments, because in the present tense it was too immediate for narrative. It was brief. It was absolute. Two men who had been waiting with deliberate confidence rearranged themselves very quickly around the fact of Kim Yi-won standing between them and what they had come for. They left. He turned. He checked her face first, then the rest of her, the quick, complete assessment of someone checking for damage before asking questions. "Are you hurt?" "No," her voice came out steady. She didn't know where that came from. Who were they? A message, meant to go as far as fear and stop there. A message about what? About me. Sent by who? People who believe you are a way to reach me. She held this, turned it over. Am I? He looked at her fully, without the performance of any version she had catalogued. And the gate light caught the tattoo on his hand, and the loose fall of his hair, and the expression on his face that belonged to none of the versions she had seen before. He didn't answer. She let him not answer. And the silence that held the non-answer was the loudest thing she had stood inside in a long time. He took her to a covered walkway on the far side of campus, lit, empty, far enough from the gate that the air felt different. He sat on a bench. She sat across from him, his elbows on his knees, hands loosely together, the tattoo in her eyeline. "The letter behind your ear," she said. He was quiet. "Kay," she said. His stillness changed quality, not tense, arrested. "You've been looking. You're difficult not to look at when you're in a room." The honesty of that came out before she could curate it. She held it rather than walking it back. He looked at his hands. "K was my brother's initial," he said. She went very still. "Kim Kwon, 3 years younger than me." A pause, not for effect. The kind of pause that happens when language meets the outer edge of what it can hold. "He was killed, not in an accident, because of what my family is, because of a decision my father made and the consequences that came down on a 17-year-old who had never asked to be part of any of it, who just existed in the wrong family." Was. She heard the tense, felt it land. "He was studying classical Chinese as a hobby," Yi-won said. "At 17, because he thought it was interesting. He showed me the character Chinese letter 2 weeks before he died. He said, 'This is the one I want someday, when I'm older.' He said it looked exactly like what it meant." He stopped. She didn't fill the silence. She had learned that some silences weren't gaps. They were the point. "He never got it," Yi-won said. "So I got it instead, as a continuation, as if the part of his life he didn't get to finish could keep existing somewhere." The walkway was quiet around them. Distant traffic, nothing close. "You make yourself cruel in that classroom," Imani said, quietly. Not an accusation, just the sentence completing itself out loud. "So people keep their distance. If they hate me, they leave. If they leave, they can't be used to get to me." "The girl last year," she watched his face. "You handled what was happening to her, and then you were worse for a week afterward." He said nothing. "You put the cruelty back on," she said, deliberately so she'd have a reason to go. Still nothing, but something in his jaw moved. "Kwon would have been furious with you," she said quietly. "For all of it. He would have seen you walk into that classroom and he would have said, 'Why are you hurting everyone else when you're the one who's broken?'" He looked at her, and what was in his face in that moment had no performance left in it. It was just the fact of a person being seen, clearly, completely, without flattery or cruelty, for possibly the first time in years. "He would have liked you immediately," Yi-won said. Something in his voice shifted into a register she hadn't heard before. "He would have said, 'She's the only one in that building with any backbone. Why are you wasting your time bothering everyone else?'" He sounds like he was right about most things. He usually was. She looked at him across the space between them, at the hair Kwon never got to grow, at the tattoo that belonged to both of them, at the grief on his face that wasn't performed for anyone, the kind that just exists as a permanent feature of a person's interior, the way a scar exists. "I'm sorry," she said, "that he didn't get more time." He nodded once, slow. "Me too." They sat in the weight of that. "Yi-won." He looked up. "The word on your hand," she said. "Endure, You've been living it like it means alone, like solitude is what the word requires." She paused. "My grandmother never said keep going alone until the ground becomes familiar. She said keep going. The alone part was never in the instruction." He held her gaze, and something in his face shifted, not collapsed, not dramatic, nothing that announced itself. Quiet. The way a room changes when something held at high tension for a very long time is finally, just slightly, allowed to rest. He didn't speak. She didn't ask him to. They sat in the covered walkway with Soul moving around them, and the gate light catching the ink on his hand, and the silence between them full of something that had no word yet, but was the most honest thing in the room. "Queens, I need a moment with you." She had every reason to leave. She was threatened, followed, put in the path of danger because of his world, a world she never chose and never asked to enter. And she stayed, not because she doesn't understand the risk, but because she looked at a man who turned cruelty into armor and she recognized the grief underneath it. She recognized a person who has been enduring alone and calling it strength. Like this video right now, if that landed somewhere in you, because it landed in me. And I need you in the comments telling me, did Amani just make the bravest decision of her life, or the most dangerous one? There is no wrong answer. I want to see this comment section divided completely. Subscribe if you are not already here, because what comes next in this story does not slow down. Share this with a woman who needs it, not as a recommendation, as something you give someone because you know she needs to hear about a woman who refused to be small. Nothing resolved cleanly. The mafia world did not soften because two people had been honest in a covered walkway at night. The danger was structural, old and inherited, and completely indifferent to emotional developments between two people who shouldn't have been in each other's orbit in the first place. Amani knew this. She had never been a woman who confused emotional clarity with safety. But something had changed in what they were to each other, irreversibly, the way some changes are. Yi-won came to the next project session on time, prepared. He sat down, pushed his completed sections across the table, and worked without performance for 2 hours. The friction between them was still there, but it had changed character, less armor on both sides, more genuine pressure. The tension of two people trying not to look at each other too directly for reasons neither has named. She found him in the library late one evening. Same table, same posture, studying with an intensity that confirmed everything the project sessions had been building toward, that Kim Yi-won, underneath all of it, was one of the most capable people in the department and had simply decided that showing anyone was not worth the cost. She sat across from him. He didn't look up. "You don't have project materials tonight." "No." He looked up. She put her notebook on the table. "Teach me something, in Korean, something real, not a textbook phrase." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said it, 4 syllables, careful, like the words had weight he was choosing to transfer. "What does that mean?" "You stayed." Quiet. "When someone expected you to leave and you didn't, that's what you'd say. You stayed." She wrote it in her notebook, watched her own handwriting. "He showed you the character 2 weeks before he died," she said without looking up. "Yes." "And you got it at the grave." "Yes." She set her pen down. "He would have been furious with me," Yi-won said, not asked. Stated, like he'd had the conversation in his head many times and already knew the outcome. For the classroom, for all of it. Kwon was the kind of person who would have seen you on the first day and said, "Why are you making everyone miserable when she's right there?" He sounds like he had good instincts. "Better than mine." She looked at him across the table. At the hair Kwon never got to grow into. At the tattoo that was both inheritance and promise. At his face, which in this library light at this hour was carrying less weight than she had seen it carry before. "I'm glad you told me about him," she said. "I've never told anyone." "I know." "How?" "Because of the way you said it. It didn't sound like something you'd practiced." He held her gaze. Something in it shifted, not dramatically, not with announcement. The way light changes in a room when a window is opened that has been closed for a long time. Kwon would have wanted you to be more than the person enduring, she said. I think you already know that. I think that's why the word bothers you some nights more than others. He was quiet for a moment. How do you do that? He said, almost to himself. Do what? Say the thing that's already in the room, without making it feel like an attack. Because I'm not trying to win anything, she said. I'm just talking to you. He looked at her with the expression that had been building across every session and every corridor and every silence. The one that had no clean name, but that she was beginning to be able to read. You stayed, he said, the English words, simple and direct. I told you I came 6,000 miles, she said. I don't quit things in the middle. They worked in silence for another hour. A different silence than the early sessions. Something quieter and more earned. The silence of two people who have stopped performing for each other and found the space underneath the performance livable. When she gathered her things, he said, without looking up, take the main path. I always take the main path. I know, he said. I've been making sure. She paused, looked at the side of his face, at the K behind his ear in the library light. Yiwon. He looked up. Kwon gave you that word to carry, she said. He meant it as something to hold when everything tries to take you under. He didn't mean it as a reason to be alone while you're doing it. He held her gaze. The thing in his face released, just slightly, just enough for someone who had been paying attention to see it. She left. In the library, in the specific quality of silence she left behind, Kim Yiwon sat with the open book in front of him and did not read a single word of it. On the day their project submitted, full marks, exceptional work, the professor announced it in front of the class with the slightly surprised tone of a man who had not expected this pairing to produce anything. Yiwon was not in the lecture hall. She found out afterward where he had been. At Kwon's grave. He went there to mark anything worth marking, not to perform grief, just to be somewhere that Kwon was real and to say, we did something. I thought you should know. He told her this on the rooftop. The building rooftop, technically closed, accessed through a door held open by a broken mechanism he had found years ago and never reported. He texted her the door number and one word, rooftop. She came because she had decided, without officially deciding, in the way real decisions often happen, that she would keep moving toward him rather than away. Seoul spread below them, lights coming on in layers as the evening arrived. Massive, indifferent, astonishing. Full marks, she said. I know. You weren't there to hear it. I know where I was. She looked at him. Were you telling him? A pause, something like that. She nodded, turned back to the city. You won't always be able to carry everything alone. She had said versions of this before, but this time it landed differently, on a rooftop, with Seoul below them, with the distance between them smaller than it had been anywhere before. I know, he said. And this time, he didn't move away from it. I don't need you to not be what you are, she said. I wouldn't know what to do with a version of you that wasn't complicated. I'm just telling you that the part you've been keeping locked away, the part that learned one character from his 17-year-old brother and carried it to a grave, that part is also who you are. It counts. It should count to you. He turned to look at her. The city lit behind her. Wind moved his hair. The tattoo on his right hand was in her peripheral vision. You really came 6,000 miles, he said. I did. For a degree. For a degree, a pause, and for whatever else the ground turns out to hold. Something in his expression changed, quieter than a smile, warmer than the neutral he wore in public. Something between and underneath those things. Something that didn't have a word in any language she had studied, but that she recognized the way you recognize something you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting for it. She looked at the city. He looked at her, looking at the city. And the space between them on that rooftop. The exact geography of not quite touching, of close enough to feel the warmth, of two people standing at the outer edge of something that hasn't been named, was the most honest ground either of them had stood on in a long time. His hand rested on the railing. Her hand rested near his. Not touching, not pulling away. The tattoo still on his skin, the K behind his ear catching the city light. And for the first time since a grave and a promise, and a word he had been carrying alone since he was 20 years old, Kim Yi-won was not performing endurance. He was just resting. Queens. She came here to survive. That was the whole plan. Survive, endure, make it to the end with the scholarship intact and the dreams still breathing. But what she found, what she built in the space between a public humiliation and a library at midnight and a rooftop over Seoul, survival didn't have a category for it. And neither did she. Not yet. Here is the question I need you to carry when this video ends. If you were a Manny, if the man with the power to protect you is also the reason you needed protecting in the first place, would you stay? Not for the romance. Not for what he looks like or what he carries or the way he says your name like it means something. For the truth of who he turned out to be underneath everything he weaponized to keep people away. Would that truth be enough for you? Tell me in the comments. I will be reading every single response, and I mean that. Like this video if this story gave you something today. Subscribe, Queens, because Between Thorns is nowhere near finished. Imani and Yiwon are not finished. The world they are standing on the edge of has more to say, and it gets deeper and darker from here. You do not want to be outside when episode 2 arrives. And share this, not as a recommendation, as something you give a woman you love because you know she needs to hear a story about refusing to shrink and finding something real on the other side of that refusal. Between Thorns isn't finished. And neither are we.